particularly when we look at different domains where the success rates aren't that high, or maybe the problem rates are very high, like sport and injuries, of course, on the rise. And we've seen, sleep science and nutritional science, recovery science have all really boomed in the last decade and a half, and yet we're still seeing, lots of injuries. And the progression we often see, or the pattern, let's say, we get S&C coaches getting their athletes strong at the collegiate level, organizations, professional teams, and then all of a sudden we're getting into these injuries, and the rehab staff, the medical staff, are then using different forms of therapy and of course exercise to get their athletes back to healthy. And then we sort of go back to the model that we had before of how we train the athletes, and we end up in this loop. And so I'm wondering what your experience is with that at the collegiate level, at the professional level.
Yeah, I've been pointing that out for probably 10 years as I go about this, and that what we're doing, and it really came to a head when I was giving a talk at one of the IAAF junior world championships up in Oregon. And I was giving a talk about how, if you want to increase the health of your athletes because you're getting, say, a hamstring pull at a championship, what you're doing is you're having to combine these different types of loads. Do you do fast loads and you do slow loads? And I had one individual come up who had been a runner at Oregon, and she said, that's really weird because I never did any slow loading ever in my time here. And I said, yeah, you did. She said, no, I didn't. I know that this is my program. We're always doing these fast loads. And I said, do you ever get injured? She said, yeah. And what did you do? You went to the athletic trainer, and what did you do? Well, we did the heavy, slow eccentrics or heavy. And I'm like, yeah, there you go. But now what I'm saying is, instead of that being two different individuals or two different groups, what you need to do in order for you to have success within a team sport or success within high performance sport, those people have to overlap. Because if you're only doing performance-based moves, you're only going to prioritize performance, and the likelihood of you getting an injury goes up. And if you're only going to do protective-based moves and you're only going to be doing health-based moves, well, there's a possibility that at a very high level of sport that your performance is going to come down a little bit. Because there is a trade-off there. And that's the trade-off that if we want to improve our performance, we need to increase rate of force development, we need to increase the stiffness in the structures, and we need to do fast moves. Standard strength and conditioning coach will know off the top of their head. Even, my daughter is 14, she knows that if you lift a heavy weight, that movement is going to be slower than if you lift a light weight. So now, if we want to do fast moves, we're low weight. Low weight means that there's not going to be a stimulus for the muscle to be strong, but there's going to be a stimulus to increase stiffness. So now if we just keep doing that type of loading, at a certain point, the stiffness of the tendon is going to be greater than the strength of the muscle, and we're going to get muscle pulls.
Yeah.
The reverse is always obviously true as well. If we're only doing strength work or only doing heavy, slow moves, that as we transition and now we're going to go immediately and do some fast moves, now the muscle end of the tendon is a little bit less stiff. The muscle is big and strong. So now when we do that same movement, now the tendon is having to stretch a lot further. Or in the case where the tendon is stiffer than the muscle is strong, the muscle has to stretch a lot further. Instead of them giving to the ideal high performance, which is both of them give a little bit, but both of them are protected from injury. And really finding that sweet spot is what all kind of that performance team, athletic training team should be working together to do, to say in this athlete, because this athlete is going to be different than that athlete, as far as whether they're a sinewy athlete, whether they're a muscle-based athlete, whether they're an acceleration athlete or a high-end speed athlete. Those athletes are very, very different. So I can't just get one program that's going to fit all of those different athletes.
Yeah, very, very well said. And, I think of Andre DeGrasse and Ben Johnson when I think of sprinting, of just those two different types of athletes that you talk about there. But maybe before we get to that, circling back to sort of tendons and ligaments in terms of stiffness and laxity, there's some general heuristics there in terms of how stiff we want things. I mean, you touched on it obviously with tendons of finding that balance.
Yeah, so it's really, really difficult to say, okay, this is the measure of what you want. A lot of track athletes, what they'll do is they will take those years where there's no world championships and there's no Olympic games. And that's their year to figure out what's the maximum they can do. What's the maximum stiffness they can do? They're going to track everything. They're going to do all of these workouts to try and maximize stiffness. they're going to keep doing that and keep doing high performance moves until they feel a little tweak. Oh, I just did a little bit on my hamstring, or oh, I just did a little bit here. Now what you've got is, for that athlete, just dial one step back, and that's the maximum you can go. But that's really highly individualized. That's like in that type of sport where it's just one movement. We're just going to run straight, maybe some left turns. That's really what we're doing. It's a little bit easier to do that than in a soccer player or footballer. So now that individual, there's going to be a little bump here and there. There's going to be all these other factors that come into it that increase the risk of injury. And so in those situations, we probably want a little bit of less stiffness. Performance-wise, the reason we want stiffness is that, everybody knows this. If you have a TheraBand, if you have the yellow TheraBand, it's super stretchy, and you put that onto a weight and you pull on it, the weight's not going to move. You're just going to stretch the TheraBand. If you have the blue or the red, which are stiffer and give more resistance, now as you pull, that weight is going to move. And so as you increase stiffness, when your muscle starts to contract, it'll transmit the force to the bone that is trying to move faster.
Explosive athletes, jumping, sprinting.
Absolutely. We did a study with the USA track and field team looking at their throwers. And the number one predictor for their performance was the rate of force development in the legs. Almost every single athlete was that way, even in different throws. So if you're talking about a hammer thrower, never does any kind of bench at all, never does any of these movements, versus a shot putter who does lots of chest-based, lots of power-based moves. Both of them had the same response, where increase the rate of force development in the legs, you're going to increase their performance towards the number one rank that year. So what that tells us is the ability to generate force quickly is one of the biggest determinants of performance. And so that's why we use that as a measure. When we look at that measure, if we only do heavy weightlifting, that measure is going to go down a little bit. We just published a study in using our football team here, as well as our rugby team here at UC Davis. What we found is that in the off season, when they did 3 straight weeks of just their heavy weightlifting, their strength went up about 8%, which was good. They're doing really good heavy work.
Yeah.
But their rate of force development, either in a maximal isometric squat or in a counter movement jump, that rate of force development went down in the individuals that's all they were doing. And so that's classic, because if you talk to a strength and conditioning coach and you say an athlete's gone away from the summer and all they do is lift really heavy weights the whole summer long,
yep,
the athlete comes back to you, are they going to be faster or slower? Every single one of your strength coaches is going to say they're going to be slower.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily because their muscle is bigger and they're carrying a heavier load. It's because they don't develop force as quickly, because all they've been doing is that heavy strength work.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And when we look at, sex differences between males and females, can you walk us through the differences and some of the sort of benefits or how the nuances change there?
Yeah, sure. So again, our tendons and our extracellular matrix, their stiffness is determined by how much collagen there's there and how much the collagen is cross-linked together. So the more linked together the collagen is, it's more a tight gel, and that gel is stiffer. And so what we had found a number of years ago now is that when we experimentally treated these little human ACL ligaments that we make in the laboratory, when we experimentally treat them with high levels of estrogen, the kind of estrogen that a woman would have right around ovulation, 2 days before, and then that 4-day window there, what we see is that the collagen content maybe goes up a shade, a little tiny bit, but the strength of the ligament, so the stiffness of the ligament, actually decreases. And so then what we found is that the enzyme lysyl oxidase, which is one of the enzymes that adds those little crosslinks, is directly inhibited by estrogen. What we've found since is that testosterone has the exact opposite effect. It doesn't affect, or it actually decreases collagen content a little bit, but it makes the structure stiffer. So now if we look at how that would affect it, based on what we've already talked about, so if testosterone is increasing stiffness, what you should see is a higher rate of force development. We see that in men. If it's increasing stiffness, that means that the ligament should be stiffer, so the knee laxity should be lower, and we should see fewer ACL problems or fewer knee ligament problems. And that's what we see in sports, so in soccer and basketball, women are 2 to 8 times more likely to rupture an ACL.
Yeah.
And that's because the estrogen's decreasing cross-linking, so that there's more laxity in the knee. There's more likely that laxity is going to extend out and cause catastrophic injury to the knee. But then on the other side, you should say, okay, if the tendon is stiffer, then we should see more muscle pulls in men than women. And that's exactly what you see in soccer. Again, 80% fewer groin and hamstring muscle injuries than in the men's game. So you can explain a lot of these differences based on these two hormonal differences and how they affect the cross-linking of the collagen, the stiffness of the matrix. It also explains a lot of other things like your ability to generate power really quickly. But if you even go beyond performance, you can go into cardiovascular disease. If you cross-link collagen, the aorta is made up of collagen. So what it's supposed to do is supposed to stretch and recoil, stretch and recoil. Well, in men, where you've got more cross-linking, it's not going to stretch as well because it's stiffer. In women, it's going to stretch a lot better. And so one of the reasons why men have a higher cardiovascular disease is because testosterone is causing cross-linking in that collagen, making that collagen stiffer, giving us a higher blood pressure. In women, you should see lower blood pressure protected from some of the cardiovascular disease, at least until menopause, when that's going to reverse.